Yes, indeed. I look forward to some very robust debates. I can tell you my panel don't really agree on any of this stuff, and all of that comes up over the next hour. But before we get stuck in, let's cross live for tonight's latest news headlines.
Good evening. It's 1 minute past 6. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. Michael Gove has named some of the groups to be investigated under a new definition of extremism, which he says will mean the government can express more clearly than ever who poses a risk to Britain. Some of the groups include those who are alleged to have Islamist views, with others described as neo-Nazi. Today's new extremism definition will be used to assess which groups should be blocked from public funding. But Michael Gove insists it's not about silencing those with private and peaceful beliefs.
We have to be clear-eyed about the threat we face, precise about where that threat comes from, and rigorous in defending our democracy. That means upholding freedom of expression, religion and belief when they are threatened, facing down harassment and hate, supporting the communities facing the greatest challenge from extremist activity, and ensuring this House and this country are safe, free and united.
Russia has been accused of disrupting the GPS signal on the Defence Secretary's plane en route to Poland. The incident occurred as the RAF jet flew close to the edge of Kaliningrad. GPS navigation and internet access was lost for around 30 minutes during the flight, but the pilots have confirmed the aircraft was never at risk. The incident happened as Grant Shapps visited British troops participating in NATO exercises in Poland. A review into air traffic control issues that caused widespread chaos during last August bank holiday weekend has found some engineers were working from home. Nearly 750,000 passengers were disrupted when flights were grounded at UK airports on the 28th of August. It was after National Air Traffic Services suffered a technical glitch. An interim report found a lack of rehearsal for an incident of its nature and scale and a significant lack of pre-planning. Scotland's former Health Secretary has been found to have breached the Code of Conduct after racking up an £11,000 bill on a parliamentary iPad. Michael Matheson quit his role in the wake of the scandal over his data roaming charges, which happened during a holiday in Morocco. He later said that his teenage sons used the device to watch football. A High Court judge overseeing a case to determine who invented Bitcoin has ruled that it wasn't an Australian computer scientist. Dr. Craig Wright had claimed that he was Satoshi Nakamoto, which is a pseudonym widely attributed to the cryptocurrency's creator. But a judge ruled today that he created an elaborate false narrative and forged documents, terrorising anyone who questioned him. A lawsuit was brought against him by the Crypto Open Patent Alliance, which is a non-profit group. A spokesperson called the decision a win for developers and the open source community. MPs are getting a pay rise with an inflation-busting 5.5% boost, pushing salaries to around £91,000. It means pay will increase by more than £4,700 next year, or almost £400 extra each month. The Westminster watchdog says it's in line with an award for senior civil servants, but it's above inflation, which is just 4%. The chief of Deliveroo says the effects of high inflation on food are starting to recede after rising costs saw consumers paying more money for fewer orders. Will Shue says cost of living increases saw many customers tightening their budgets and forgoing takeaway dinners. He said food inflation was outpacing wages by about 2 to 1, putting a squeeze on spending power. Economists expect inflation to fall over the coming months, helped in part by lower energy costs. And the Office for National Statistics staff could strike after being asked to work from the office for 2 days a week. It's understood staff have been allowed to work from home since the start of the COVID lockdowns, but they are now being asked to return to the office on some days. Some say they took their jobs with the understanding that working arrangements were flexible. A spokesperson said the ONS had made a hybrid model for several years, and it's enforcing the rules to balance business and personal needs. And the Prince of Wales has expressed concerns about the amount of time children spend on phones as he visited a youth club today. The Prince asked some of the children how long they spend on their phones, with one girl saying she spends up to 15 hours a day. The future king said grown-ups were also guilty of excessive screen time and said we've all got to get better at managing it. He also poked fun at his apparent lack of artistic skills as he took part in decorating some biscuits, saying that his wife is the arty one. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Sophia. I am Michelle Dewbs. I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. That last story there in that news bulletin, 15 hours a day. I'm sure I just heard that correctly. How on earth can a child spend that long on a telephone? Where are the parents in all of this? The mind absolutely boggles, doesn't it? Anyway, I'm with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin McKenzie, and the broadcaster and journalist, Ella Whelan. Good evening to both of you. I heard you, by the way, Kelvin, during those bulletins. The story there about the civil servants saying that they don't want to go back to work, it got a bit of a chortle from you, didn't it? Why?
Well, because we've just seen that the whole people's holidays were destroyed last August bank holiday because, as it turned out, the bosses, and I blame the bosses for this, hadn't rostered on an engineer to be at the headquarters. And so when everything started going wrong and all the airlines were grounded, literally nobody, and some people ended up 6 days away, they couldn't get back to this country, right, was entirely due to the fact that there were all the engineers were working from home. That cannot be right. That is a management issue, and there should be a management sacking for that. And the idea that people are now saying that they're going to go on strike because they can't work from home, I understand the rail cost issues, I understand the child cost issues, but actually it's bone idleness. And actually, management should get a grip on this.
Is it bone idle? If you've been hired on a contract that says that you can work from home or be flexible, and then your employer says, actually, no, you've got to go to work, is it bone idle? So then say, no, I'm not having that?
No, that would be a legitimate challenge if these people have been started on contracts that, enshrine flexible working. I mean, we all know that the reality of working from home is that in times of crisis, it's not as good as being together in the office or the workshop floor if you're an engineer. I mean, how engineers can work from home, I need that explained to me, because that doesn't seem right. But what Kelvin said, that he knows about the costs of rail and the cost of childcare. Those are issues that are very real for people, particularly in relation to childcare. If that was something that was solved by making it a bit cheaper and a bit more accessible, more people might not work from home.
Ella, they did say flexible working. Now, flexible works on both sides. It's a 5-day week. Flexible is come in 3 days, be at home 2, or a version of that. What these people are saying is, we are staying at home 5 days a week, and if you don't like it, we're going on strike. It's disgraceful.
Well, let's see what the outcome of that is. How can anyone work from home when they've got small children? It's incredibly difficult, isn't it? Get in touch and let me know your thoughts, though, because there's a lot I want to talk to you guys about. I'll come on to the extremism story in just a second. I also want to talk to you about the new pay rise for the MPs, £91,000. Is that too much money, not enough money, or what? And the children of these sub-postmasters, do you think that they deserve compensation for the impact all of this has had on their lives or not? So I'll be getting stuck into those stories and more before 7 o'clock. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you email me, or you can tweet or me at GB News. But of course, the main story today, we have ourselves a new announcement, everybody, relation to what extremism means. Let's listen to Michael Gove explaining it.
Extremism is the promotion or advancement of an ideology based on violence, hatred or intolerance that aims to negate or destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others, or undermine, overturn or replace the UK system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights, or intentionally create a permissive environment for others to achieve these results.
I just want to remind you, in case you're not familiar, the previous definition, which was published in 2011, described extremism as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and belief, as well as calls for the death of members of our armed forces. Well, of course, there's been lots of reaction to this. Let's listen to Angela Rayner.
When it comes to our national security, when it comes to the threat of radicalisation, when it comes to the toxic scourge of Islamophobia, neo-Nazism, anti-Semitism or any other corrosive hatred, the whole House can and should work together.
I can tell you now, right, all of this really has divided opinion. At some point, I'll play as well George Galloway. I'll bring in the responses as well from some of these groups that have been mentioned today. But before I do that, let me bring you in, Kelvin. Where are you on it?
Well, the truth about the matter is that this is a political event, and it's not something, I think, which unifies the country or the country felt very strongly about. I think the issue is the war in the Middle East has divided two of our planks of religion in our country, one represented by 4 million people and the other represented by 250,000 in our country. And the politicians have decided, I think unreasonably and ridiculously, to get involved in a definition of extremism rather than actually doing the one thing which this country would like to see, which is deal with the economy. So I think it's a waste of time.
I'm going to get the definition up on the screen as well. Just in case you want to be reminded, you can browse that at your leisure, but it's exactly as Michael Gove just described. Ella, where are you on it?
I think this is a big mistake. I think that, in fact, actually, even though Gove has sort of tried to couch this or caveat it by saying, well, it's only really about what sponsorship government gives to groups, and sort of almost tried to define it as a sort of technocratic issue around what the civil service does, it will have a chilling effect on freedom of speech. The new definition around extremism, even though it doesn't bring in sort of new criminal offences, will mean that discussion about, phrases like our democratic system, dissent from that, you could see a situation in which people got into trouble for criticising our democratic system. I've got a lot of problems with our democratic system. I think most people can understand the difference between ISIS, Hamas, which doesn't have issues with our democratic system. It's a death cult that wants to kill a lot of us, to put it frankly. And those of us who might want to see, I don't know, a completely different political system in the UK. It's the government's answer to the issue of skyrocketing cases of anti-Semitism, a big issue around Islamism, is to try and crack down on freedom of speech, to try and narrow the realm of public debate. And I think that's a really big problem. It's also a problem that, Angela Rayner there, in response to Michael Gove, listed off all the problems with extremism and radicalisation and didn't say Islamism. She said Islamophobia, neo-Nazism, which neo-Nazism is a bad thing, but it's not exactly a massive problem in this country. I'm not saying they don't exist, but they're certainly not in the same, category as, for example, anti-Semitism. But she didn't mention Islamism, which is pretty much the number one threat at the moment. It's the threat that many of her own MPs within her own party are facing.
So why do you think she didn't mention it then?
Because there is this sort of unwillingness to have an open discussion about the issue that we face, which is that there is a problem with, small groups of Islamists within the Muslim community who are being given a free pass both by people within that community but also by the sort of latte-clutching protesters, white middle-class protesters on these pro-Palestine things that shout things like Yemen, Yemen, make us proud, turn another ship around. There's an apologism for Islamism and anti-Semitism. And there's, because they're terrified of being called Islamophobic, they don't want to go there. What you want is someone to come along, a politician or someone else to come along and say, the solution to this is solidarity with Jews against anti-Semitism, and to tackle that properly, but also to engage in this discussion, to ask the question you just asked, why is this happening? What is it that people are not understanding about a free and tolerant society? Let's have those debates, rather than just trying to put everyone in jail as an extremist. It seems like such a cack-handed kind of way to deal with this.
Yeah, so in Parliament today, Michael Gove, he actually mentioned a collection of groups. He used basically what they call parliamentary privilege, which basically means that you can't get sued, essentially. So he used that privilege to mention 5 groups, 3 of which he would say basically fall under the kind of Islamist branch, 2 of which he would describe as falling under the far-right potential branch. Now, what he's saying is he's mentioned these organisations, but he's not saying that they necessarily will will fall under this description. That is yet to be assessed. We're going to have a list in a couple of weeks, I think maybe 3 weeks or so, where we get all of these different lists. But notwithstanding that, I can tell you some of these lists, some of these groups that have been named today in Parliament, they certainly are not happy. They've been responding to this. So, for example, I can tell you now, MEND, this is one of the groups, they said that this is a blatant attack on civil liberties. The Muslim Association of Britain said it was a blatant effort to stifle dissenting voices. CAGE said it would challenge the government's deep dive into authoritarianism. And the Patriotic Alternative said it was a dangerous step towards a totalitarian state. See, I find it quite interesting, and I was listening to a lady from one of these groups. She was giving an interview somewhere else earlier on today, and she was saying this whole notion that Michael Gove is talking about Islamism and Islamist, she was essentially saying it's almost like a made-up word to try and fit the narrative that people are trying to push. And she was basically saying it was very discriminatory towards all Muslims. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I think one of the problems I have with all this is if they are extremists and they're dangerous, surely it doesn't take a law to find these things out. Surely, if they are doing something which is dangerous to our nation, they should be arrested under the 1,000,001 laws we've got to protect our country. So why is it, if CAGE are a problem or MEND are a problem, why haven't we acted against them already?
Well,
and the reason I suspect we haven't is because either they're very cunning or very clever, or they're not doing anything currently which you can be arrested for. And just to describe somebody as an extremist, honestly, if you walk around London any day, you're likely to bump into extremists all the time.
Well, he hasn't prescribed these groups as extremists. So what he's saying is he's mentioned them in this parliamentary privilege. There's going to be this investigation into those groups and wider. It's not just going to stop there. And we shall see some of these groups have actually said they want Michael Gove to mention them outside of Parliament so that then they can start legal action against him. They completely reject this notion that they are extremist. One of the things that people have pushed back on, Ella, is this whole kind of almost like slippage and expansion. So I know Miriam Cates, for example, she was raising concerns saying, well, today you're talking about Islamists and neo-Nazis. What's going to stop you tomorrow speaking about gender-critical people, i.e. people that believe that you can't change your biological sex? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the broad, woolly language that is used around this is open to all kinds of abuses. I mean, today you might say this is used for the noble cause of fighting against anti-Semitism or for doing something about Islamism. And, you know, I think all of us feel the desire to try and, you know, do something to stop the kind of open, naked Jew hatred that's been prevalent on UK streets and the sort of, you know, you feel sick watching people wear pro-Hamas headgear and badges on these marches when you know what Hamas has done on the 7th of October. You feel like you want to do something. But the government's approach is to use the kind of language like, you know, Michael Gove in his broadcasts this morning and in Parliament talked about the idea of hatred and anyone who incites hatred. I mean, what does that mean? You could see someone coming along, for example, in the gender critical or gender wars and say, well, this person, by saying that a woman is a woman and a man is a man, is inciting hatred against me as a trans person. And boom, you've got a case for extremism. It's just I think it's a really crass way of dealing with some very deep and important cultural problems.
So the question I have is, why do they bother? Why did they bother? Anti-Semitism actually is illegal, right? And if you could actually prove Islamophobia, and every so often there's court cases on it, then that's illegal. So why is it they felt right in the middle of an economic maelstrom of our country, did they feel they need to waste their time?
Because they hate freedom of speech. The government's, you know, suspicious of us and our ability to openly debate. I think we should challenge it.
Well, let's look at that. Is that what you think is behind all of this? And what do you make to Kelvin's point there? Why now? Why this? Do you think it's even going to be effective at all? George Galloway, of course, he had a lot to say about this afternoon. We'll look at that and more after the break. See you in 2.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m. Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like, anyone who talks about... anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... they're not... neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting a zip.
Yeah, and also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting a top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible ghastly...
Yeah.
I mean, this is stuff, isn't it?
She's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far right.
But also,
I mean,
even if she were right-wing, which she isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day? What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
well,
if you
no,
say
they
that,
won't,
will they?
won't.
Because you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, I'm the unfashionable workplace.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry, and I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the broadcaster and journalist, Ella Whelan. Welcome back, everybody. We've just been talking about the new definition of what an extremist apparently is in this country, whether or not we need this. Is it a step in the right direction or what? Francis, can I just ask, please, this whole definition of extremism, will it include hate speech against Christianity? Shane says they are just so busy tweaking things to make free speech even harder. According to them, there will never be enough legislation. John says this is a pathetic gesture and a complete waste of time. John says, perhaps as our country disintegrates before our very eyes, our wonderful gang of MPs could perhaps discuss the definition of useless instead. So I was just mentioning, the last time the definition of extremism was put forward was 2011. And I think then it was pretty clear, actually. It was like vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy. And it was going on about you had to have mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. This new definition, so many people are saying it stretches its overreach now and it infringes on free speech. One of the people that's been speaking out is George Galloway. Should we listen to what he had to say?
It is obviously true that this is part of a culture war wallpaper that's being created for the general election soon to come. It's not good enough to say that it doesn't seek to ban or jail anyone. You try getting a bank account once you've been branded by Michael Gove as an extremist.
You see, and I find this quite interesting because this new definition, it's not about trying to find stuff that kind of exceeds criminality. That's not what it's about. It's about things that fall perhaps short of that threshold, but still would be deemed, quote, unacceptable. And that's what many people are struggling with.
Yeah, the government's been quite open in the way in which it's sort of justified this by saying, look, we had this problem where there were all these people and groups who we couldn't lock up and we couldn't do anything with, or we couldn't shun for sponsorship because they weren't actually taking action. They weren't actually organising terrorist organisations. You know, they weren't doing anything that crossed the line. And so we've brought this expanded description in so that we can get at them. And that's an open and actually quite naked attack on freedom of speech. I mean, you know, I don't agree with George Galloway on barely anything, but what he is right on is that this will have a chilling effect, because if you are labelled as extremist or extremist adjacent, or however they're describing it, by the government, then it will impinge on your ability to act in society. And I think the most important thing for this is not that we're all bleeding hearts for these often quite foul organisations, whether it's Patriotic Alliance or anyone else. It's not that I deeply sympathise with them and wish that they could spout their nonsense more openly. It's that any clampdown on public debate, one, drives this kind of, you know, in some cases genuinely hateful and awful views underground where it can fester and become more potent. And number two, it stops us from actually changing people's minds. This is a cultural issue that is quite wide-reaching. Like I said, a lot of those people, there's a mix of those people on those pro-Palestine marches, many of whom are just shocked at what's happening in Gaza, but many of whom are either in support of or apologising for pro-Hamas sentiment. One, you can't lock all them up. Two, you can't call them all extremists. And three, we've got to change those people's minds and get them to realise that there is something worth defending about democracy, tolerance and freedom of speech.
Or, if they've crossed the line, arrest them under the plenty of charges that there are already. And that's my argument. My argument is we don't need this, and this is just a distraction by a government that is collapsing before our very eyes.
Well, actually, you mentioned the Prevent strategy in 2011, Michelle, and you know, the thing about Prevent, and Rishi Sunak actually, when was it, 2 weeks ago in his speech, sort of said one of the things we're going to do is ramp up Prevent at universities. We're going to crack down on, you know, people spouting radicalisation at universities. In practice, Prevent has, a lot of the time, targeted people who it sees as at risk of radicalisation, which a lot of the time means just going after ordinary Muslims, often ordinary Muslim young men, and harassing them and asking them questions and you know, intervening into their student lives for no reason other than that they are Muslims. So it's an extremely blunt instrument which strays into the realm of racism.
I'm not sure that's entirely true, is it? Isn't the truth about the matter is that probably a colleague or something has been worried about things that this person has been saying, and then Prevent has been fired at them. That's the issue. Now, you may be right that you can't, but if you are saying things which perhaps threaten the nation, right, and you're a student and you're hearing this, then you are going to fear that something might happen, and therefore you should act. You are asked to act. And if that happened to you at university, and you'd heard a colleague talking about blowing something up, or not even as strong as that, but hoping that Hamas came in through the front door or through the channel or something like that, then you might act in that way.
There's a very big difference between freedom of speech and expression. And when I certainly never expressed support for Hamas, but when I was at university, we did have lots of discussions about changing the system in the political system in the UK from a lefty point of view, which under the new sort of extremism definitions about which, you know, seeking to protect democracy, I am all for. To champion democracy, I'm all for. But you don't do that by undermining and attacking democratic rights, which include freedom of speech and the ability to, by the way, say you hate the nation. There's a difference between saying... There's lots of things in this country that people hate, that viewers at home are thinking, I hate about this government. There's a difference between that and taking action
The one thing that's not clear to me is who defines whether you have crossed a line or not, if it's words.
Well,
is there going to be a committee that does this, and is Gove going to be sitting on there?
If you look, there's really, you know, a lot of people are saying the police should get more involved.
Well, they mustn't.
And if you look at what the Metropolitan Police recently has done, it's gone, a lot of people say it's been very soft on the marches, particularly when things have boiled over into just, outright violence. But at the same time, the other day, there was a young man called Niyet Gobani who was holding up a sign saying Hamas is terrorist in sort of counter to a demonstration which, involved some anti-Semitic tenets. He was wrestled to the ground and arrested for stating what is actually legal fact, but more importantly, which is something that we need to be going and saying, is Hamas is not just terrorist, it's an amoral death cult. So I just don't trust the authorities on this.
I thought it was really interesting that so many people said that he was agitating the crowd.
Yeah.
And I think if you're in a crowd and you're agitated by a statement of fact that Hamas are terrorists, then you need to get a massive mirror out and you need to look in it and have a serious word with yourself.
OK, so I have a very good friend, Wendy Henry, who carried a picture of the hostages and was waving an Israeli flag in Westminster 2 weeks ago for that on the Wednesday night, in that big thing like that, right? And she walked up and down. The next thing that happened to her, and there was literally, how many, I don't know, 3,000 protesters there on the Palestinian side. There was one, it was Wendy, right? She's walking up and down like that. What happened to her? Cops took her to one side and said, you pack this up. Took the flag off her, took the picture off her and said, you pack this up because you're agitating the agitators, right?
Yeah.
It was, honestly, she is... I literally saw her about a week later. I didn't know anything about it, right? She was beside herself, that how on earth could she be a problem when there were literally thousands on the other side? So I think it's unfair on the police. Actually,
but the police would say in that instance, oh, we took that lady away for her own safety. That's what they would say.
She didn't have a problem. She was getting on fine. She was getting on fine. I think it's unfair burden on the police to make that decision, to be fair.
Well, this is what a lot of people are coming through in my inbox and saying. They're saying that at the moment, the police... They don't even police stuff properly as it is, whether that's burglaries, many of you saying, or laws as it is today. So what the question is people are saying, how on earth will any of this be so-called policed? I have to say as well that this isn't necessarily about criminality. It's about something being unacceptable, which is raising a lot of eyebrows. And that whole notion in terms of slippage and expansion, today it's all talking about so-called Islamist groups or neo-Nazi groups or far-right or whatever. Tomorrow, that whole notion, perhaps, of if you have the audacity, everyone, to believe that you can't change biological sex, will it be you next that have got a big fat label of extremism on your door? But what I found most interesting about all of this, and I have to say, none of this extremism stuff announced today washes with me for a simple fact. I fail to take it seriously because you can have all the definitions in the land, you can have all your meetings in your land, and you can stand and do all the tough talking that you want. But all the while that you have a teacher in hiding in Batley who is fearing for his life, then you have not combated extremism in this country. And everything else for me is just words. And that is the point I get stuck at, Ella, all the time in these conversations. If the government are serious about you can't threaten democracy, you can't be intolerant, you can't celebrate diversity, or whatever the sentence it is that they want to say that day, if they truly felt that, that fella wouldn't be in hiding. I don't know what I would have happened to him, but I would certainly ensure that he is in safety and security, and I would also ensure that he has a way and means of financially supporting his family.
Yeah, and all of that should happen for his personal protection and comfort and of his families. But you also have to say, well, how can you get a situation in which that doesn't happen at a school again? Because there was two things that were wrong in that situation in Batley Grammar. Number one, there was the sort of agitating and threatening from Islamist groups, from the outside at the school gates. And almost worse was the cowardice of the school to not stand up and say, hang on a minute, our teacher who shows an image of the Prophet of Muhammad or, has a conversation that makes some students feel uncomfortable, that's his academic freedom. We support our our staff, and we're going to stand up for his right to be safe.
And the teachers'
stand up
unions.
against- Yes. So,
where's the teachers' union?
But the fact that none of that happened has to make you ask, why is it that we are not in our schools or in other situations? There's been lots of examples of, screenings of films being taken down at Cineworld because of, Islamist agitation outside and things like that. You have to ask, why aren't we able to defend freedom and tolerance and democracy? What are we lacking? We need to get better at it. We need to get more courageous. We need to get more fervent about it.
Well, people need to get...
That local politician, by the way, who has never said a word about that, went on to become elected mayor of West Yorkshire. And she had a
tweet about Tracy Brabham?
Yeah, she had a tweet out today announcing in all her glory that they were going to take over the running of the buses in that particular area. Never once, not once, when she was the local politician for Batley, she never said a word in defence of that man. She never said a word about the whole thing. We have politicians with no backbones, and this man is now living a life and his family under a different name, and we don't even know where he is.
See, I just think it's appalling, and it undermines. You can stand on the steps and you can talk tough, you can do whatever you want, but all the time that scenario continues, and I've noticed these days now, many people start rolling their eyes. If you have the audacity to mention the situation in Batley, they go, oh, here she goes, here they go. But actually, it's current, it's here, it's present day, and I think it's appalling, and I'd love to know what he thinks when he hears all of this ridiculousness about extremist definitions. So many of you getting in touch on this one. John says all of this is a pathetic gesture and just a waste of time. That sentiment, I can tell you right now, is coming through thick and fast. I want to talk to you after the break about MP salaries. They're going to be earning over £90,000. Is that too much or too little? Your thoughts. I'll see you in 2.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Tomorrow will be a case of dodging the downpours, some pretty heavy ones around, but also some bright spells. When low pressure is dominating, sitting right over the UK, you're never going to have dry weather for long. But this low has been providing some very soggy conditions through central and southern Scotland through the day, and it stays wet overnight here. Showers elsewhere, becoming a bit drier for England and Wales through the night, but then more heavy downpours coming from the southwest through the early hours. Gusty winds with that as well, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder that might wake you up. A very mild night for most, but just low enough for a touch of frost in northern Scotland in the countryside. So a damp and chilly start for most of Scotland. Further heavy showers further south, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads for the morning commute. Those downpours should ease through the day, but it stays dull and damp for southeast Scotland, northeast England. Elsewhere, a mixture of bright spells, but also some further showers. Again, pretty mild for England and Wales, 15, 16, where we see some sunshine, but a cold feeling day, particularly with that persistent rain over Scotland. Gets pretty cold on Friday night. Many of us will start the weekend with a touch of frost, but also, many of us will start with some sunshine. Stays fine for much of eastern England, northern England and Scotland. Further west, cloud will be edging in with some patchy rain. Temperatures in the teens in the south, single figures once more further north, despite some decent spells of sunshine. Goodbye.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, my panel remain right through till 7. Former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the broadcaster and journalist Ella Whelan. We have just been getting in touch, getting stuck into that whole conversation about extremism and whether or not it's even necessary, all this stuff. And crucially, will it make a blind bit of difference? I've got to say, coming through really strongly on this inbox is that actually you just don't think that it's going to make that much of a difference. You're saying that actually it will all come down to why aren't police, etc., policing things as it currently stands. There's enough rules and regulations when it comes to extremism as it already stands, but they're not being effectively managed. Let me talk to you next about MPs' pay, because we've had confirmation now it's going to set to rise to more than £91,000. This is after the watchdog there gave them a massive inflation-busting 5.5%. Now, I can tell you now, right, some people say that, you know, whatever you pay them, it needs to be much, much more. Other people are saying they're getting way too much as it stands. But that pay increase translates to about an extra just shy of £5,000 a year. So 91,000 just over with the total that they're getting. Is that good value for money? Too much, too little, Kelvin?
I think it's entirely appropriate. And these politicians, much as, I mean, after all, GB News wouldn't exist without them, these politicians do 7-day weeks. It is a 52-week job. You're always on parade. You can't afford to do almost anything without it being a major news story. I think they make the money. And on the Conservative side, as distinct from the Socialist side, of course, many of them will be taking pay cuts to come and represent the good people of our nation. Whereas on the Socialist side, of course, they'll all be either councillors or trade unionists, in which case it's a hefty, great pay rise, which is why so many Socialists want to become MPs and are likely to do so in the November general election. So
what do you think a fair salary for an MP is then?
Look, 91 grand, it's not too bad. They can hire the missus. They can hire their daughters as agents and representatives. There's a fair amount of money coming in. But what other job do you know where you're flogging yourself to death? And actually dealing with the public must be enormously hard work, right? You're flogging yourself to death, and then every 5 years, 3 years, 4 years, boom, out the door you go. And then nobody wants to put an MP on their board.
Hello?
Oh, no, I don't agree at all. I mean, it's not really the amount that gets me. I mean, I don't think most people care about that. It's this justification that if you've just had politicians say to striking nurses, rail workers, people who are on a fraction of what they're on, you know, we're all in a recession, times are hard, I'm afraid we can't, you know, rise your pay to inflation rates because, you know, there just isn't enough money in the purse and we've all got to pull in together and make our own sacrifices. And then this kind of thing happens. It completely undermines the nonsense argument that there is some kind of national effort to tackle the economic crisis. So I think rightly a lot of people will be quite annoyed by this. You know, the £90,000 wage I might be OK with if politicians were working for some sense of public good, if there was sense of flogging their guts out for democracy. But particularly, I mean, never mind about there's no socialists MPs out there. If only there were, it might be a little bit of a more interesting debate. But in terms of the Conservative Party, from Grant Shapps to Suella Braverman to Rishi Sunak, you can see that all of them are looking to the end of their parliamentary career to get on the cash cow of the after-dinner party circuit. So a lot of our politicians at the moment are on a careerist track. They don't really care about the 90 grand a year. What they're looking for is the kind of celebrity and publicity they'll get post their parliamentary careers.
Right.
So sympathy for them I have none.
I know a story through my wider family. I know a story about Jeremy Hunt, OK? Chancellor. Bloody hard-working all the time. He took time out to do something in relation to damaged children, right, challenged children. There was nothing in it for him. He's never had any publicity for it. He worked damned hard at this, almost single-handedly, and it has happened. And it's only happened because of him. He did not seek any preferment. He did not seek PR. Nobody knows about it. I happen to hear about it. Right? I think a lot of good is done by politicians, and the bad, as in Julius Caesar, lives after them. The good is often turned in their bones, and that is my issue. I don't know how much I agree with Ella. I don't know what is the right number, but the idea of quoting railway drivers is a bit rich, isn't it? They make 65 grand for about a 32-hour week.
Well,
and they're hoping all day long the train breaks down.
For a lot of people,
I don't need...
you know, if only Jeremy Hunt was a bit of a better chancellor. He's a crap chancellor, and he's not doing anything for the raising the economy.
Ella, you may know a lot about economics. Our country is not in good shape.
At least rail drivers do a job that, you know, transporting people around the country is an important thing. But this is the point. I think that, you know, you don't score points as to who's more valuable, who does more work. The government has said we can't give striking workers any more because there just isn't any more pennies in the coffers. That's obviously nonsense.
But I think a lot of nurses did get about 5%, so some would argue that actually it's probably similar amounts. The chairman of IPSA, this is the body, of course, that decide on what this pay amount should be, they've said serving as an MP should not be reserved to those wealthy enough to fund it themselves. We believe the decision recognises the vital role MPs play in our democracy and considers the continued economic challenges facing the country. Well, there you go. Where are you on that conversation? Tell me. gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get a hold of me. And speaking about money, we know about the sub-postmasters scandal by now, the compensation coming their way. But what about the children of those sub-postmasters? Some of them now are saying that they should be in line for compensation because of the impact of it all on them. Do you agree with that or not? So I'll see you in 2.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now, I'm sure you have seen this video that went viral this week, and if you haven't, well, I think you're going to enjoy it. This is a firefighter leaning on a fence whilst watching a trapped driving instructor's car sink in 4 feet of floodwater. Looks very comfortable there, doesn't he? Just leaning against the fence.
Just chilling, just relaxing. Yeah, there were there were in fact 2 Essex fire and rescue crews, an ambulance and a police car parked near the sinking vehicle, but they wouldn't enter the water because they had to wait for specialist crews who were trained for the water depth.
Well, 2 people who weren't going to sit back and watch were these 2, Jack and Danielle Price, who took it upon themselves to rescue the submerged driver. And Danielle joins us now. Very good morning to you, Danielle. And you are a hero, an absolute hero. What happened in this video? Make sense of it for us.
So we were filming in the area for our YouTube channel, and we've seen the fire brigade come through. I was actually out at 5 o'clock in the morning with my husband, Jamie. We know it always happens there, as you can see, and it was clear. We've seen the fire brigade come through, we've followed them, and they're just standing around as if nothing's happened. In the clip, it says he's fine, he's on his phone, and then sort of walked away. But what they failed to realise is when my partner actually opened the door, as you can hear, he's on the phone to the emergency crew in panic, thinking he's going to sink. So we could not just sit there and watch. He's absolutely terrified.
Yeah, poor bloke. Well done you. Do you reckon this is health and safety gone mad?
It is, because although I do sympathise with them, they are so red-taped, but surely sort of common sense has to kick in as open the door.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the broadcaster and journalist, Ella Whelan. Welcome back, everybody. We've just been talking about MPs' pay, whether or not the £91,000, just over actually, it's soon to be, is the right about figure or not. Paul says if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys, Michelle. If we paid more, we might actually have a better quality of person rather than the dross that we currently have. His words, not my words. Carol said, are you having a laugh? £91,000. They should all be on performance-related pay. If we did that, they'd all be having a pay cut, and rightly so. She says, how dare they? I can tell you now, Trevor, again, MPs should be on performance-related pay. They would all be skint. So many. Mark says, again, get them on performance-related pay. 95% of them would probably need to use the food banks if that was the case. Is there anybody out there that actually thinks that £91,000 is not enough? Anybody? Can you get in touch and let me know your thoughts? Neil actually says, given them £150,000 a year with no expenses whatsoever and half the number, you could have about 325 of them instead of the 650 as it stands. Would you support that or not? Now, we all know, don't we, about the Horizon scandal by now, the fight there for justice and compensation by the sub-postmasters. Well, now, a group of the children of these sub-postmasters are seeking compensation. Apparently, their lives were left in tatters by the impacts of the goings-on with their parents. What do you make to this? Now, I have to just be transparent. The person leading this group, the young person leading this group, she says she recognises this. She probably won't get any taxpayer compensation, but she's pushing for perhaps Fujitsu, for them to look at this compensation level.
Well, I mean, the reality is that lives do change for the worse when you're a child. It depends what the atmosphere was at home. You know, I was lucky. I was raised originally in a council flat. I was as happy as Larry. I had a very, very happy upbringing.
Well, it wasn't a happy life. That's what they're saying. They're saying that their parents were bankrupt.
Honestly, kids are very flexible and can get it over. Somebody has come up with a good idea, and they're trying to get some money out of it. Honestly, their parents were treated disgracefully, and I am 1,001% behind them receiving very large payouts. And there's some extraordinary changes happening in the justice system in order to accommodate it. And I think that is enough. I'm not in favour of the children having money.
So some of these kids, by the way, they're saying that their life was massively impacted. They were bullied, of course, because many people thought that their parents were wrong-uns, were criminals, etc. Some of these people, their parents perhaps even prosecuted, perhaps even ended up in jail. You know, so many children saying that they really did struggle as part of this group. Where are you on it, Ella?
I'm genuinely torn. You know, I think that if you read some of these stories, you know, if your father or mother was a postmaster and was either sent to jail, or it has to also be recorded that there were people who also took their own lives because of the accusations. So you have some very serious events happening in family life. People splitting up, people being ostracised from their, small communities and neighbourhoods, and children feeling the knock-on effect of that. Being bullied at school, being shunned by your people who don't trust your parents. All of that I have the utmost sympathy for, and if I was one of them, I'd get all I could out of it to try and get some kind of joy back into my life. But like Calvin, I think there's, you have to take a step back and ask about the precedent of this, which is, what does that mean for expanding compensation outwards? Is there a problem with making it too broad? In actual fact, in the article we've got in the Telegraph, they ask a sort of legal expert, and he says that actually this isn't a legal question, it's a political one, which is that if Fujitsu and the government decide that it's politically right to expand the compensation out to families, wives, children, then they can do it. You know, it is possible to do it. It's not there's no legal barrier to it. But when at the moment the government is, you know, and Post Office is being very tight-fisted with helping the actual postmasters, I don't see it happening.
Well, apparently the head of Fujitsu, he has expressed an interest apparently in meeting the head of these young people's groups. So we shall follow that story with interest. David says, I don't agree with these kids getting a payout. He says it's just kids trying to get money for nothing. Cool, blimey. Richard says, of course these children should be entitled to compensation because they suffered along with their parents. There's £91,000. Natalie says it's not a lot of money as a salary for an MP. When you look at the amount of abuse and threats of their life that these people have, they should be paid much, much more. There you go. So many people have this idea about performance-related pay, though. I keep coming back to it. That is coming through thick and fast. I don't think it'll ever happen. But for now, Ella, thank you for your company. Kelvin, thanks for yours. And, of course, thank you at home. It's Nigel Farage up next, so don't go anywhere. But I'll see you tomorrow night.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Tomorrow will be a case of dodging the downpours, some pretty heavy ones around, but also some bright spells. When low pressure is dominating, sitting right over the UK, you're never going to have dry weather for long. But this low has been providing some very soggy conditions through central and southern Scotland through the day, and it stays wet overnight here. Showers elsewhere, becoming a bit drier for England and Wales through the night, but then more heavy downpours coming from the southwest through the early hours. Gusty winds with that as well, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder that might wake you up. A very mild night for most, but just low enough for a touch of frost in northern Scotland in the countryside. So a damp and chilly start for most of Scotland. Further heavy showers further south, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads for the morning commute. Those downpours should ease through the day, but it stays dull and damp for southeast Scotland, northeast England. Elsewhere, a mixture of bright spells, but also some further showers. Again, pretty mild for England and Wales, 15, 16, where we see some sunshine, but a cold feeling day, particularly with that persistent rain.